number 10 Indiana at number 7 Notre Dame. Friday night game, 8 p.m. Eastern time on ABC and ESPN. So let's start off with you. You have the Notre Dame passing game against the Indiana pass defense. So what should we be looking out for Riley Leonard and the Notre Dame receivers against the Indiana defense?
Okay, so for pretty much everything else here, I'm going to have a very specific thing that relates to the matchup of each game, or it's this set of players I'm looking at, or this sort of scheme. But honestly, the more I was watching Notre Dame, and Mike Denbrock's passing game is not all that complicated. We saw it at LSU last year, and it was just great first-round level players, and we see them all succeeding in the NFL, executing at an extremely high level. This Notre Dame team is different. They're built to run the football, as you're going to get into, and they're not really loaded at receiver. So I think the thing for me, the more I was watching them, is I go, are they ready for this? Are they ready? Indiana is the best team that they're playing all season. Yeah, no question. I mean, next they played Louisville, they played Georgia Tech, right? Texas A&M, at the very beginning of the year. But I'm not entirely sure what we're going to see from this Notre Dame passing game, because even against a softer schedule, it's been kind of middling. They're 26th in the country in passing grade. Riley Leonard's had a much better second half of the season down the stretch, but that's also in games against Army and Navy and Florida State and Virginia. They're 63rd in pass blocking grade. They're 59th in receiving grade and 71st in yards per attempt. Look, we know this is a team that wants to come out and run the football. And if they could run the ball every single play, they probably would. If they could go and run the ball for 350 yards, and they're going to do it. Even with Leonard, I think he has 14 rushing touchdowns this year and 16 passing touchdowns. This is just how they operate. But if they do get in a situation against an Indiana pass defense that has been really good outside of, 3 or 4 drives from Will Howard in the Ohio State game? Look, Indiana, top 6 in both, top 11 it is, in both pass rush and coverage grade, right? They do things a different way a little bit than a lot of other teams. They rotate their coverages a lot. They play a boatload of cover 3, which Notre Dame has actually kind of struggled against. I think the one thing I noticed with Notre Dame is through the latter parts of the season, Riley Leonard's gotten really good at just identifying one-on-one matchups. And again, these are very favorable matchups when you're talking about the Florida States and Virginias and the Navies of the world, right? Navy's a good team, but they're not an elite defense that's going to stop Notre Dame. They just find those one-on-one matchups. And if you get to man coverage, young quarterbacks have an easier time seeing it. They can just pick their favorite guy, or you can isolate up and figure it out from there, right? Indiana playing this much zone coverage, I think, adds a different dimension. And when you think about that cover 3 I mentioned in particular, they're on the 4th most cover 3 in the nation. Riley Leonard this year is 65.8 passing grade against it. Again, not horrible. He doesn't put the ball in harm's way, but can he make those reads? And I think it's always a thing we've said with Riley Leonard too, where you don't want to blitz him, and you don't want to man up, and you don't want to make his life easier to see. I think it's still a thing for him when he holds the football longer than he wants to. He doesn't usually get to that second and third read. He's either going to hit his first read on a quicker throw, or maybe even a slot fade or something like that in Mike Denbrock's passing game, or he's going to take off running, because that's what Riley Leonard does. He's honestly the same guy he's been since he was at Duke. Now we're just on a bigger stage, right? So I'm just curious to see this old Notre Dame passing game. I think his passing grade on third down, also in the low to mid-60s, but all year with their running game and their defense and the schedule, they've hardly ever been behind in games. So it really hasn't been an issue, because they haven't been in very many third and longs at all. If they do get in this spot, if Indiana gets ahead, if Notre Dame falls behind the chains, if Indiana's run defense is winning the battle, I honestly think straight up we're just going to find out if Notre Dame's passing game is good enough. I mean, their leading receiver, Bo Collins, has 427 yards this year. That's it. I mean, this is what you're talking about. They have hidden this passing game, I think, just about all year. There's been a handful of big throws. It was a throw and a busted coverage down the seam against Louisville. Navy came out zero blitzing them for whatever reason they came out zero blitzing them for, and that wasn't going to work against Riley Leonard. But I'm curious to see if Curtis Rourke finds his rhythm and Indiana gets ahead or gets Notre Dame behind the chains. Can they throw their way out of issues? Because I think we actually have no idea if they can or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for Notre Dame to have to rely on Riley Leonard's arm in this game, that means you shut down what Notre Dame wants to do, and that is run the piss out of the football. So Dawn, I really think this Notre Dame run game against the Indiana run defense, it's a heavyweight matchup, and I think it could very well decide who wins and loses this ball game. Because I mentioned it, Notre Dame's offense is completely centered around their fantastic run game. The Fighting Irish are third in the FBS and EPA per run this year. They lead the Power 4 with 6.7 yards per carry, 4 yards after contact per carry as well. You got a three-headed monster in that Notre Dame backfield between Jeremiah Love, Riley Leonard, and Jadarian Price. Those three have helped Notre Dame have the fourth best rushing grade in college football this year. But it's not just them. You see some teams that have a superstar runner, but not really a great offensive line. Notre Dame is a damn good offensive line as well in terms of run blocking. They are tied for 7th in the country with a 77.7 run blocking grade. So by all accounts, this might be the best rushing attack in college football. And I'm even counting Boise State into that with Ashton Jeanine, how good he is. Because it's everything they've got between Riley Leonard, one of the best mobile quarterbacks in the nation, Jeremiah Love, who I think is going to enter next year as the best running back in college football. I actually put out a tweet after the Heisman on Saturday, saying who my finalists are going to be for next year's Heisman, a way too early one. I had Jeremiah Love on that list because he has been that freaking good this year. And Jadarian Price is a great number 2 back as well. And then also the offensive line, like I said, is kicking ass right now in the run game. Indiana has been very stout against the run this year, though. They're currently tied for 4th in the country with a 94.1 run defense grade, and they only allow 3.7 yards per carry, also 4th in the country. And Dawn, they've only allowed 0.8 yards before contact per attempt. That leads the nation, less than a yard before contact per attempt for Indiana so far this season. So diving even more into it, because it's kind of simple to say, oh, it's a great run D against a really good run game. We'll see what happens there. I wanted to go into what they run, how they kind of structure their run game around this. So the Notre Dame, what you got to know about the run game, they run inside zone a lot. They run inside zone about 48% of their rushing attempts this year, which is the 18th most in the country. Indiana, though, very strong against inside zone. Right now, 8th among FBS defenses in EPA per allowed on inside zone runs. Also, Riley Leonard, I mentioned before, has one of the best legs of any quarterback in America. He's currently 5th among Power 4 quarterbacks with 764 rushing yards on the year. But Indiana has really yet to allow a big game from a quarterback on the ground. They allow 16 rushing yards from quarterbacks per game. So Indiana hasn't really let a quarterback beat them on the ground this year. So if Indiana can get Notre Dame behind the chains and force what you said before, an average Notre Dame passing attack to beat them, Indiana could very well, and I think will, pull off the upset in South Bend. But easier said than done, though, because I think as good as Indiana's run D has been this year, they have not faced a run game as dominant as Notre Dame's yet. So I really think that match between Notre Dame's run game against Indiana's elite run defense, this could really decide the game, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's going to be so much fun to watch the trench battle, first of all, when you're talking about Notre Dame's offensive line that was inexperienced coming into the year and now facing Michael Kamara and C.J. West and James Carpenter and all the guys Indiana has up front, especially all those James Madison guys, right? And I think you mentioned that last part about Riley Leonard, and that's such a huge part of the attack, too, whether he has the football and it's a designed quarterback run or the option game or the threat of the option game or even as part of, what Leonard can do. I think they've done a better job in the second half of the season, putting in even more design rollouts and moving Leonard in. There's just a constant threat of his legs. I think Jalen Walker, the middle linebacker, is really a guy that's going to be key for Indiana stopping this. And especially, I think, look, beyond even the trench battle, you got to tackle, man. You got to tackle these guys, and you got to tackle well. It's going to be 20 degrees out there on Friday night. Jeremiah Love is good at breaking tackles as anybody in the country. Jadarian Price is tough to tackle. Riley Leonard's as tough to tackle a quarterback as anybody in the country. He's a really good athlete, underrated speed. So I think Jalen Walker and Aiden Fisher at linebacker play a big part in this. And again, I think we have to think about goals. We've talked about this in some other games, say like when we've covered a Kansas State or a UCF or something like that. The goal is not to hold Notre Dame to 50 rushing yards. No. That's not going to happen. The goal is that Notre Dame is going to want to run for 3 or 350, and if you can hold them to 150, 175, then you're in a position to win a ball game, right? You just can't let them go crazy on you, and you have to make enough tackles when you have them, you got to have them. Because we've seen it over and over with Jeremiah Love. I mean, is he one of the 5 toughest dudes to tackle in college football right now?
Yeah.
I mean, he's just incredible and so much talent. Is what a true sophomore, is that right? I mean, just crazy level of talent in their backfield, and Indiana's going to have to play their best game of the year in run defense.
Absolutely. So let's go over to the other run game. I'll let you start off here with the Indiana run game against the Notre Dame run defense. What should we be looking out for when they have the ball?
So there is a weird part of this for me with Notre Dame because their defensive line just has not been as good in run defense this year, and they only lost one guy, Javonte John Baptiste, to the NFL, the edge player from last year, but it's mostly the same crew, and they just haven't been as good. Last year, they were 5th in the country in run defense grade as a defensive line. This year, they're 90th. And it's odd because, I mean, they still don't give up a ton of yards because you got guys on the back end, Jack Kaiser, Drake Bowen, Xavier Watts is tackling better, Leonard Moore at corner has contributed to that. He's got a 90 run defense grade. But up front, it hasn't been as good. Howard Cross and Riley Mills and all of that. And when I think about this, I don't think Indiana does anything crazy with their run schemes. In the beginning of the year, they had a few more trick plays. But for the most part, they want to get off tackle. They want to kind of spread this thing out and move these linebackers a little bit wider. And when you look at Indiana and their Power 4 ranks of getting off tackle, right, in these outside runs, 11th in the Power 4 in rushing grade, 4th in run blocking grade. Their zone schemes are really good in their zone schemes. 18th in yards per attempt, 17th in explosive run percentage. We'll see if they can get between the tackles and really challenge Kaiser and those guys, especially on the second level downhill. But I think at the end of the day, Indiana wants to run outside with their zone schemes, and they want to complement that with the RPO game that we've talked about. It's a very RPO-heavy scheme. They can get those glance throws, those slants in behind linebackers, behind the second level of the defense. But I think that it would really benefit them, obviously, in 20-degree weather on the road if they had balance. And I think it starts for them with
snow showers, too, I think are in the forecast.
Yeah, it might be.
Friday
I'm not
night.
sure if it'll be during the game or not. But look, Justice Ellison and Tyson Lawton, they're two really good players. They're two good backs. Are they game breakers necessarily? Are they 4-3 running guys that are going to take 80-yard carries down the field? No, but I think we've seen in past times, I think even in the Ohio State game, they ran well, especially Ellison, especially when they turned the corner in some outside zone. They ran well in that game. I don't think they're going to be afraid of Notre Dame's defensive line, even though we know there's talented guys up there. But that's going to be the goal for Indiana, I think, is to get off tackle. And then if they want to work between the tackles, use that as the second layer. And then you start working in the RPOs and everything that works in this offense.
Yeah, so I have the Indiana passing game against the Notre Dame pass defense. And really what I looked at is, all right, can this Hoosiers offensive line hold up? Because if you look at Indiana's 2 worst games of the year, they had a loss to Ohio State where they got convincingly beaten that one, and a 5-point win over Michigan. We actually at both of those games, Dawn. They're the 2 worst performances in pass protection as well for Indiana. The Hoosiers in those 2 games against Ohio State and Michigan had a 45.6 pass blocking grade. They had an 83.5 pass blocking grade in their other 10 games. They almost doubled their pass blocking grade in the other 10 games compared to what it was against Ohio State and Michigan. And in particular, had a lot of issues when Ohio State and Michigan blitzed them in that game. The Buckeyes and Wolverines, when they sent a blitz, got a pressure on 48% of the time. Almost half the time they sent a blitz, they got a pressure in that game, and they sacked Curtis Fork 7 times when they blitzed him as well. In the other 10 games, the Hoosiers only gave up 9 sacks against the blitz and a 26% pressure rate. So 7 sacks against the blitz against Ohio State and Michigan, 9 sacks in the other 10 games, almost a 50% pressure rate against the blitz in those 2 games, and 26%. So really, it was by far their worst pass blocking they've ever done this year against those 2 teams. Michigan is 1st in pass rushing grade. Ohio State is 18th in pass rushing grade. Notre Dame is not too far behind. They're right now 25th in pass rush grade this year. Indiana has not played another team that's in the top 25. So this is very easily the 3rd best pass rushing team they played all season long. And the Fighting Irish blitz a good amount. They blitz on 40% of their snaps this year as 40th in America, and a little bit ahead of what Ohio State and Michigan do on the year, which is right around 39% as well. So I think if you hold up better in pass protection in this game, you could have a great matchup because you have Curtis Rourke and those receivers against Notre Dame's secondary. Rourke is 2nd in the nation with a 91.8 passing grade this year. The Hoosiers lead the nation with a 90.8 receiving grade, but Notre Dame is 2nd to only Texas with a 92.4 coverage grade this year. So as enticing as that matchup is between Curtis Rourke and his receivers against Notre Dame secondary, we can't get to that unless Indiana blocks well in this game. So I'm really looking forward to seeing whether or not they can hold up better against a really good pass rush, or if it'll look a lot like the Michigan and Ohio State game where the offense completely stalled out because it just could not block anyone.
Yeah, Rourke is a true pocket passer who's not really going to escape much of that. Even though he has I think he's leading the nation in passing grade under pressure this year, he's going to do it from the pocket, right? And I think that's the big thing that you just mentioned. You can't even get to those receivers. You can't get to the drop back game unless you can protect against blitzes. Against a 4-man rush, I don't have any issue with Indiana. I really don't. It's against blitzes. It was Wink Martindale first, like you mentioned. It was Jim Knowles after that. And how much of that, look, Notre Dame blitzes 40% of the time, but there's nothing in the rule book that says they can't do it more than that, right? I can go all the way back to week 1 when they played Texas A&M.
Yeah.
They blitzed the shit out of Connor Wigman early in that game, and it threw off A&M's entire game plan, right? So I think what would concern me the most is who's going to win on the outside matters, because you're going to see, I think, a lot of man-to-man coverage from Notre Dame. But both of these teams, I think, and this is a case for anybody, but I think in this game especially, they don't want to be in 3rd and long.
No.
For Notre Dame, it's the fact that, well, they're just not used to it, and they don't have that many weapons on the outside. And for Indiana, it's that exact thing. It's preventing those blitzes from even happening. If you're in 3rd and 2, they're going to be much less inclined to get the blitzes going. If you're good on early downs, if you're running with good tempo, I'm curious to see how fast Indiana wants to go offensively, if they can find a rhythm, or if Notre Dame's just going to blitz them from 1st down and go right off rip and go, okay, beat it. Go ahead, even if it's run blitzes, right? That's the thing that would concern me the most for Indiana. I think on either side of the ball is how can we pick up blitzes against something, I would call Notre Dame an elite defense, right?
Yeah.
Can we pick up blitzes? Because I think a 4-man rush, they will be okay. But how often is Notre Dame going to apply that pressure, especially early in the game?
And I know Benjamin Morrison's out for the season, but I still think Notre Dame's secondary is very good enough to hold up, even if you send 7-8 guys.
Leonard Moore and Christian Gray and Xavier Watts. Sneaking around back there. Yep. Jack Kaiser flying around the field. I mean, they can
survive.
It's the second highest graded coverage unit for a reason. And they play a lot of man-to-man. They have the ability to play a lot of man-to-man effectively. So I'm with you. I think the blitzing is probably the number one concern for me for the Hoosiers.
Yeah, because I think if you look at it and you say, listen, there's some secondaries where you can't blitz that much because they can't survive. If you need as many guys back there as possible. Notre Dame is like, no, we got man-to-man coverage. You send as many as you want, and we got you on the back end. And I think you mentioned before, Wink Martindale, brilliant defensive mind. Jim Knowles, brilliant defensive mind. Marcus Freeman is the head coach of Notre Dame. He's a brilliant defensive mind as well. He definitely watched those 2 games.
With 2 weeks to prepare. Those are the 2 games you have to watch, because those are 2 games of relatively equal competition, right? Yep. At least on that side of the ball, absolutely.
And not only that, Dolan, it was the only 2 games Indiana didn't blow out the opposing team. So if you're Marcus Freeman, it's like, okay, what happened in those 2 games? Because every other game, Indiana's blown out everyone. But in those 2 games, they didn't. They barely beat Michigan, and they lost pretty convincingly to Ohio State. So if you're Marcus Freeman, say, hey, watch those 2 games, see what happened defensively to slow them down. And I think he's going to look at it and say, hey, we got to blitz a lot in this game and see what happens there. So, Dawn, in the battle for Indiana, which we've been hoping for all year, which would be an electric game that we're going to be at, who will win and who will move on to play Georgia in the Sugar Bowl?
This was so hard. I don't know about you, but I actually feel like and both of these teams kind of got criticized for softer schedules and this and that. But we're here, and they both went 11-1, right?
Yeah.
Look, Indiana needs to do 3 things to win this game. Contain the run enough so it doesn't take the game over. Force Riley Leonard to hold the football, right?
Yep.
Don't blitz him. Exact opposite. Don't blitz Riley Leonard. You're making his life easier. Just don't do it. Make him stand there. And like you mentioned, pass protect against Notre Dame's blitzes.
Yep.
That's just going to be – that to me is good. I think you're going to know right off rip, especially if Indiana gets the ball first, what Marcus Freeman's plan is early in this game. This was hard, but I'm actually going to take the Hoosiers to do just enough. Just enough. I'm taking Indiana 27-24. I think they've got one more big ride in them. And I think, boy, the fact that this is like the biggest football game in the state of Indiana history is crazy too. But I think, look, you know a fun stat I found too? Curtis Rourke, all right, over the last 3 years, of any active quarterback in college football, has the highest passing grade in November or later.
Interesting.
I'm going with it. I think Curtis Rourke's Curtis Rourke's got one more big one in him. I think this run defense, I think Mikael Kamara and Jalen Walker and these guys in this run defense, they do just enough so Notre Dame doesn't take it over. I think that's where it starts. We're going to know very early in this game how physical Indiana's willing to be. But if they can pick up blitzes and make Riley Leonard beat them, I'm going to take them 27-24.
Curtis Rourke's like Reggie Jackson, Mr. November instead of Mr. October. So, all right, yeah. I like that. All right, I am going with Notre Dame. I got them winning 31-21 in this game. I think Indiana's run D has been spectacular all year, but like I mentioned before, they have not faced a rushing game as elite as Notre Dame's this year. So I think they'll rely on that, and I am worried. I am very worried about Indiana holding up against the blitz and holding up against Notre Dame's pass rush in general in this game. And I think Notre Dame's got a brilliant defensive mind in Marcus Freeman. He definitely noticed that on tape, and I think he is going to be sending a lot of blitzes Indiana's way. So I think that will ultimately slow down Indiana's offense enough. I was with you. I really was close to picking Indiana in this one, but I do think Notre Dame's rushing attack will get the advantage, a slight advantage. And then I really think the big key is that Indiana's just not going to hold up well enough in pass protection to allow Curtis Rourke and those elite receivers to truly win this game. So the first game that we differ on, Dawn, and the first game we're talking about today, I got Notre Dame winning. You got Indiana winning to move on to play Georgia in the Sugar Bowl in the quarterfinal round. Hey, thanks for watching another episode of the PFF College Football Show. Please make sure you guys subscribe to the channel.
Also, subscribe to PFF Plus at subscribe.pff.com for all of the same data and grades that we use in our show, plus fantasy tools, betting tools, and our mock draft simulator.